Heligan is someone I've had the privilege of working with on some serious cases over the years. He is the Risk Intelligence Director of Heligan Group and co-founder of their new strategic advisory arm, and generally one of the finest intelligence practitioners working in the UK right now. I wanted him on because he operates in a world that people never see, and he just thinks about information in a way that I personally find fascinating every time that we speak. So Dylan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to meet you here as well, face to face.
Yeah, face to face, finally. Obviously, we go way back, and the context of the conversation that we're going to have today is a lot different to what we normally would have. I've got a list of short and concise and hopefully insightful questions, which are just designed to just get as much of your expertise in a short period of time with as little input and rambling from me and my end.
More rambling from me.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. So, yeah, with that being said, I'll just jump straight into the first question if you're all right with that.
Absolutely.
Take me back to the first time that you realized finding information about people was something that you were unusually good at, but not just generally something you're interested in, but generally better than most people around you.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thinking about that, less just about the people, but generally, I think in 2003, going back to when I worked for a UK law enforcement agency, but I was an overseas liaison officer working discreetly in an overseas location. And there was a case where we had the local host nation wanted a bit of our support. They gave us a bit of information. We were looking at cigarette smuggling at the time, higher level organized crime groups. And so they'd given us a bit of info, and we then pulled a vehicle in the UK and took out 5 million cigarettes based on the initial intelligence. But after that, the overseas authorities were quite happy to go, okay, that's given us a starter. We're going to go and do our investigation, keep things wrapped up to ourselves. Now, obviously, they're playing games with a commodity that is impacting on the UK's economy. So smuggled cigarettes cost the UK a lot of money, in terms of the lost revenue, etc., through whatever comes through. So I went on that one case that we had, and I started working around a profile of the movements of the individual driving that particular truck at the time, and then worked out sort of a bit of travel history and started profiling based on name, type of freight, and at the time, Arctic trucks or articulated lorries with a tractor vehicle and a separate trailer, and they all had their own different registrations. So I started profiling something, got a bit of a pattern there, and then I used a local source to then try and verify some of the ownership of some of these vehicles and establish quite quickly that they were all rental trucks. So I was able to build a profile of the different tractors and trailer rental companies and what their vehicle registration patterns look like. And then I started selecting certain elements and added and enriched that intelligence picture. And then started notifying the border to say, I think we've got one coming in on the next vessel. Let's pull it and have a look. And 100% hit. The next one came in, 5 million facts. Great. So that proved my theory. And so went on and build that up. And this went on for about 15 months. And I think overall, I ended up with my project taking out about a couple of 100 million cigarettes that were coming into the country. Big numbers, but that's what we were dealing with. And ultimately, because the profile caused a lot of damage, the host nation weren't too happy because they were saying, we're trying to investigate, and every time you take out a load, they're changing their tactics. I was going, but I'm getting all the loads and I'm protecting the UK's revenue on this. So ultimately, it got so bad for the crime group that the big boss stuck his neck out, and we were able to lock on to the big boss, who it was, and then with the evidence that I created through the seizures, was able to give this huge pack of evidence to our host nation, who were then able to work through a successful prosecution against right up to the top of the crime tree. So ultimately, even though there was a lot of disruption to their investigation throughout and a bit of unrest in the camp in terms of the techniques that we were using, I was protecting UK interests, and ultimately we took that right up to the top of the tree and had a great bit of success. So I think the takeaway from that in terms of finding people, finding things is to try and look at the bigger picture in everything you do. Take a step back and ask yourself the question, what's really going on here? What are the other signals that come into play, rather than always being very focused on one element and a person? So for me, that was a great learning experience. And that's something I've always taken away from that time. So 20 plus years, I've always worked to that sort of principle.
On the same vein as that, then, just building off that, when you sit down to start a new case
Yeah.
and you have nothing but a name, what is the first thing you actually do in the first hour that most investigators skip or just get wrong?
That's a great one. That's a really good one, Aaron. So two prongs to this. Okay. First hour, a little bit of thought process. But this is also because I do deliver OSINT training as well. This is something that I deliberately set as a trap at the start of a task when I go, right, I've told you something about myself or about a situation, and I need you now to go away and investigate that. And very often it's just about me. They know my name. I've given them a little bit of information, but I deliberately withhold some info around that. And I know with what I've given them, they'll only get so far. And so basically with that, I think one of the key things you need to understand is when you're given a name of a person is look at the type of name and try and differentiate if that's a common name, like a Janet Smith or a John Smith sort of name, or is it a name that's sort of much more of a rare name that you think, well, that sort of combination, and especially if you get a middle name to go with it, I'm likely to only get a few hits. So spend a few minutes just having a quick check against the name to go, I'm just going to do a search engine search on that name and just get a bit of an idea of how many hits I'm going to be getting in the very first crawl and work out from there, from those results, are there any sort of low hanging fruit, easy hits? But the real difficulty here is that when you just get a name and if you get more than one hit, which of the two, let's say you've got a minimum of 2 hits for the same name, which one's the correct person when they're clearly 2 different people? You need context around it. So already you're in a compromised situation going, well, it could be this person, it could be that person. So what I think ultimately that it goes down the path of being a guessing game unless you get really lucky and you get an absolute, there's only one person on this planet that has that name and therefore, it's likely to be this person. So for me, this goes back to communication. And this is what I teach people in the training courses that I deliver as well, is that when you're given a task and only given a name, really, when somebody's tasking you with that, nobody just knows a name when they ask you to investigate. And if they are asking you to just go, oh, I've got this name, Janet Smith or whatever, I need you to investigate them. You also need justification as an investigator as to, the necessity and proportionality of why am I going to potentially now start hunting down somebody's personal private info to share with somebody when I don't know the context. So it's entering into a communication level. There has to be some form of context as to why they want you to investigate. And you say, what do you think they've been up to? And I think that's the key thing in that first hour is that people often forget to actually just go back and ask the question and ask some additional questions. So I think the assumption is that when a client comes to us and we say that we can find people and whatever, they think that we've got some magic tricks up our sleeves, which we have. We've got bags of experience. We've got some great tools and we do work our magic. But they need to understand that that magic doesn't really work if you just give us a name and no context. So I think what's really important in that first hour is to try and ascertain some additional information like location of the individual, country as a bare minimum. Really? What country are they in? If you can get it down to city, town, suburb, or even the last known address, anything like that. Or you can go to, what do we know about them? Where do they currently work or where have they worked? Is there any sort of context that you can put them in a place of work? Because a place of work can give you potentially a company's house record. It can give you an address linked to the company. It can give you a website. It can give you social media access about the company. And then you might find the person's bio on that particular website. So you start drilling it down from the outset by asking the questions to give yourself certain pools of information where you can tap into. Ideally, really, really, where it makes a big difference is getting a phone number, an email, details of any associates or partners they might be connected to. And I think one of the other most underestimated things, which is the most important thing that I always teach people as well, is have you got a photograph of the individual? Because if all they've got is a name, but there is a photograph of the individual, as a practitioner in this field, we can work with photographs. There's a lot of technology and capabilities that we can use photographs instead of search terms and words as well. So these are the things that I try to get investigators to think a little bit about before, because we're all eager to get going. So before we get going, it's to think a little bit about that, take a step back, ask some further questions if it's possible, okay? And then work out the logic, especially if they do say, yeah, we think they worked for this company, then already for that company, you might know the industry. And if you know that, you can use your own common sense to research, well, if they're in the such and such industry, you can look for a person in that industry and start narrowing down your key search terms in combination with the name that you've got. And quite quickly, you'll probably find that you can narrow that down. And that first hour is so key to giving yourself a chance, really.
And then just to pivot on that, but in the same lane, we about a time you were looking into someone and then you found something that sort of completely changed the direction of the case, and it was something which nobody expected.
Okay, yeah. Probably the biggest breakthrough case that still stands out in my career was, and this was a sort of cusp of time where technology was really starting to come into play in the OSINT world. And at the time, I was working with one of the UK's national law enforcement agencies, and I was a team leader for a bespoke team within the agency that was pioneering new OSINT capabilities. Interestingly, my boss had been speaking to another sort of branch commander about a huge job they had ongoing, and they'd had this phone number, and their challenge was they had this phone number was linked to whatever the commodity was at the time. Not that necessarily that important, but they'd had a whole team of intelligence staff trying to work out who this phone number was associated to. All they had was a phone number, and this phone number was a key orchestrator in the crime that was going on. And basically, my boss then said, hang on a second, let's go and speak to Dylan to see if he's got any ideas on this. And straight away, because I was working with, at the time, this was really new upcoming technology, I was trialing a system called Long Arm, which has since been rolled out to UK law enforcement around the country. But with Long Arm at the time, this was probably 2015, 2016-ish, and they built in mobile phone emulators into the platform that they provided. Now, these were hit and miss by downloading them at the time onto a normal laptop. They'd be really flaky, but they'd built their own emulator that was reasonably stable at the time, had moments where it dropped out. And so working with that technology, I'd already started building up some burner accounts, as you do as an investigator, discrete profiles. And I'd built in a profile, for social media, and also had a WhatsApp app running on this emulator. So I just said to the guys, well, look, if you're willing to share the number, I said to the branch commander, give me the number. And so I put the number in my contacts list on the emulator and then fired WhatsApp against it. And this is sort of bread and butter stuff that we probably do today with lots of OSINT tools that you can get. Yeah. But at the time, nobody had really thought of this, or there were very few people doing and thinking like this at the time. So I reversed this through a WhatsApp check, and lo and behold, the number came back to a profile on WhatsApp. So this is also down to luck, but being a bit innovative in thinking. And this is where the real luck came into play. Obviously, as many of your listeners will probably know, is that WhatsApp is owned by Meta, as is Facebook nowadays, and Instagram, and so on and so forth. That they had used their Facebook profile for their WhatsApp account because it was all interconnected. So not only did I get a hit on the number, but it gave me a profile photo, and it was a Facebook photo which had the person's name at the bottom of the photo. So I looked at this, and so I called the branch commander in and went, here's a possible. Now I need to verify whether this is true, but that's a start of a 10. I've got a face, and I was able to then go and find the Facebook profile. And because we were working obviously with techniques that we could work out in law enforcement, the approximate geolocation of where the phone was active, I was able to verify that, hey, this person is actually, yes, we're looking at this sort of information from what we could lawfully obtain from the telecoms companies, and overlaying that with what we knew about what we thought this person was about. And it married up, it corroborated the info. And then we were able to do a bit more. So I then said, look, I'll spend the rest of the day trying to bring together a profile on this, sent them a dossier the next morning, and it gave us justification that there was enough verification in there for it to be the right guy. We were able to go out and get operational warrants for that and deploy that case against that individual, which ultimately, I think about 3 years down the line, that case went to court even after I'd left the agency. And I saw the news report and I went, well, that can only be that case that particular situation that unfolded. So I really love these sort of things, but this is like within a 5-minute spark of, hey, let's just try something slightly different. We'd had prior to that 2 weeks of a whole intelligence team trying to find out that number, and it was just going nowhere. There were no leads, and the one lead came from a new piece of technology, which has now become bread and butter in in the investigation world, but it's that was a big moment, I think, for us at the time.
And then a slightly different angle tangent to go down is just based off a post that you reposted on LinkedIn recently
Yeah.
about the tool Instant Data Scraper, which is
Yes.
obviously an extension just to bring loads of data off of websites. And then there's been a change of ownership recently, and has found it's potentially compromised. How often are you seeing tools that investigators rely on every day actually becoming the threat vector?
Yes, that's actually a really good question. So I think first and foremost, looking back at that one, that's a few weeks ago now. I think just to clarify as well, and I think a deserved hat tip to go out as well to an OSINT guru in the scene called Mika Hoffman, also known as Web Breacher. So I'd recycled a post that had come out from Mika earlier that day, and I think it's really important if you're in this investigator world and you're in the OSINT world, is to find the key leaders in the OSINT industry, players that have been in this for a long time. They know the stuff. They're trusted people within the industry. We've all sort of met each other at different conferences over the years and spoken to each other in situations like this or in online chats and stuff like that. So I think that's really core is, first of all, become a member of the community and engage with the community, because sort of word of mouth is really important around some of these things. Now, I picked up on that from the info, and that particular tool had been a brilliant tool for many years. And I have taught people in the OSINT classes. And I felt, given that, first of all, what I did is I did some fact checking around the ownership before I just recycled the message. And indeed, I'd seen that the ownership had changed. What I couldn't see from my end was, is it actually doing anything malicious? But obviously trusting the community where people are really good at sharing great tools, but also being wary of things when things change. What you don't want to do is put people out of business. But I think in those key instances, when you're dealing with free tools that people are providing and they're sat in your web browser, and effectively when you put any tool through your web browser, like an extension, you read the small print, it's going to be saying it can monitor your traffic. So that risk is always there on everything you use. And you've got to make judgment calls. But when you start then getting messages from trusted members within the community saying there's potentially something malicious going on there, I mean, it's a free tool. You can switch it on or switch it off. I chose in that moment to switch it off and also share that knowledge that Mika had also put out to say, look, be mindful of this. There's a possibility this might be doing something that you don't really want on your computer and scraping data about everything you're doing. And who knows where that data is going, because it was quite an anonymous setup behind the company as well. So the nice thing is if you can go behind and verify who's behind it. So just coming back to your question there as well, going above and beyond the individual tool, I've generally, having also worked in law enforcement for many years, we always had to critically ask these questions about who is the vendor, who is providing this. And I think going now into the private world where you don't have a government machine asking lots of these questions as well and putting restrictions, it's easy to go down the route to go, well, there's no restrictions. I can just add this to the computer. I think that still for many years, I have generally been wary of OSINT tools, particularly the free ones, because, you've got to ask yourself the question, who spends a lot of time programming and coding really extensive stuff to create a great tool for free? Then what are they actually getting out of it? And I think one of the things we have to sort of really be realistic about is that they are earning something from it. It's not in cash that you're paying for it, but ultimately your data is their earnings, and they're likely, with everything, are going to be selling the data, whether it's anonymized or not, but there is going to be an element of your user data is going to be part of what they're going to be selling to advertising firms around what sort of searches you do. And so that people can buy that anonymous bulk of data to target people in geolocation. So they'll probably be working out from your IP address where you are. And that ultimately comes around to being fed back through your web browser. So that's the sort of most neutral sort of thing that's likely to be happening. But there's also possibly more sinister stuff as well, as per the suggestion from Mika, that this one may have turned a little bit more malicious. So I think if you don't understand code and you can run test scripts and potentially run things like Burp Suite or something and see if there's any leakage going out, you've got to be asking yourself these sort of questions about what is the risk here to my business? Is what I'm doing, or do you switch it on and off at certain instances. I think another key one just to think about is also GitHub is a great repository for some superb tools, but it's also who's creating these tools and just sharing them. Can you actually see the source code? Is it open source that you can check the coding? Do you need a coder to check that for you to make sure there's nothing malicious in there? There was one source told me last year that some instances of stealer log malware, when you talk about stealer log info, that gets stolen from your web browser as you're typing all your stuff in, and that gets put out through the dark web and collected by breach data companies that resell that data again later on. There's stealer log info out there, and one source suggested that some of the stealer log info is distributed through GitHub as well, where people that don't know code just download, oh, that's a cool tool, put it on their computer, and it starts helping itself to your data as you're moving around. I don't have any proven examples of that where I can say definitely that's happened. But, you listen to the people with other experiences in the industry, and if they're saying there's definitely some GitHub repositories out there that potentially are doing that, but I don't know which ones are out there. I think just finally on that, with paid subscriptions, do your due diligence about the vendor, understand the beneficial owner of the company selling the tool. Okay, it's a big business, it's possibly government or wealthy backers behind the scenes. And you've got to ask yourself whether there's ulterior motives going on behind the backers of any such tools. So again, without bringing it down to any specific country, because that sounds a bit biased, but there may be countries that have an interest in all of your investigation work going through there. So again, think a little bit about if you're doing sensitive investigations about corruption in a certain country, do you want to be using a tool where the beneficial owner is potentially from that country? Could it be like an intelligence service backing it? So ask this question throughout whenever you subscribe to these systems, and do regular checks, sort of like a minimum of once a year. Just do an overhaul before you resubscribe to things. Has the ownership changed? Has anything changed? Has my model changed? That opens me up to risk a little bit more. And it's always weighing up that risk to your business. And if there is a likely backdoor in there, how much damage could that cause to your business if that's leaking to the wrong sort of there or a vendor? Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Is well structured. That was a bit of a complicated question when you get down to it. So I think you covered all angles. And then, so last question, easy one, or maybe not be easy. Where can people find you if they want to touch base, or is there anything in particular that you want people to know that you're doing at the moment?
Okay, so where do people find me? Okay, I have lived my last year since I worked in law enforcement trying to be as discreet as possible. You can never be totally secretive because we've all got data out there that will expose ourselves. So by saying I'm strictly locked down, it's impossible almost, to be honest. So realistically, it's very, very difficult. So I just tend to say I'm easy to find for those who really want to find me. And assuming that there'll be some investigators here, you can probably find me. I am, nice, easy one is I am on LinkedIn, okay, but not with my full real name. Just a little bit of a hint there. But here's the bit, ask the question, what am I about? Well, I'm out there in, I hold director of intelligence roles at both Heligan Group and Nodem Global. So there's your snippets. Look for me with those and you'll find me. Okay. So a little bit of a mystery around that without being too mysterious. But going forward in what I'm doing right now, what's of interest? Well, obviously, the back end of last year, October time, I came in and joined Heligan Group, and just a bit of idea of what we do at Heligan Group. So it's a private equity investment wealth management company, but now we've brought the risk advisory arm to that. So from our arm that we work in there, and my colleague Adam Irwin and I came in, and we've just recently expanded the team. So we've got a great team of individuals, highly experienced. And we provide due diligence, simplified and enhanced. We support litigation, arbitration cases, conflict resolution, all sorts of things, from anything that you can think of. And it's very often around high net worth individuals as well. But we work a lot with law firms as the go-betweens. They'll represent high net worth clients and we'll deal with that. But it's also the Heligan Group. We support background support for the Heligan Group's wider sort of mergers and acquisitions that they get involved in, investments, there's wealth management side of things, but we also provide service to those clients in the wealth management element as well. So, lots of people have problems, conflicts, litigation, if they're in that high net worth individual sort of world, that there will be, people always after their money or whatever it is. So, and if there's conflict arises, we're there to help basically. And it's a very large portfolio with lots of requirements. And on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier on, I also deliver OSINT training. And also other training to law firms together with the group of people. So we run the Executives in Intelligence Academy for training, and we do training for law firms, financial institutions, corporate intelligence community. So a few people watching this may already know me because they may have been on a course with me. We're quite a discreet group, really. It's not massively advertised online. We operate mainly through word of mouth, and we sort of build it in between. So it's not daily that we're running this stuff out. We have particular modules and programs that we'll plan for the year in advance. So, a lot of those courses are just taken up. And so if you request them, you might need to be a little bit ahead of the game on that and just get in for the ones that maybe are still around there for later in the year. But yeah, that's generally where you'll find me online. I'm normally sat at a keyboard somewhere, square eyes, keeping my eyelids open with matchsticks into the wee hours of the night at times. Yeah, that's the way we rock and roll, dude.
I know the pain. I know the pain, mate. Dylan, incredible to have you on. I knew that the conversation would be good because we've had many conversations, but I've never been able to selfishly ask you just a set of questions, which I really wanted to. And
That's cool.
I mentioned to you earlier, it's difficult interviewing people within our industry because we all sign NDAs and secretive and no one wants to talk about it. But I think you've got a real talent of not giving too much detail away, but giving a bird's eye view and just dropping a lot of knowledge in a very concise way. So I do rate this as one of the best podcasts I've done selfishly and personally.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you.
So thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate it, Tom.
I really appreciate it too, Aaron. And yeah, like I say, happy to come on at any time again in the future. If you've got any other questions, I think they're great questions, actually, very challenging, make good day. So really appreciate your support and with that, Aaron.
Yeah, I remember that, and I hold you to that. It's on tape now.
Okay, brilliant.
See you later, Dylan. Appreciate it.
See you, and thanks for watching, everybody. Speak soon.